All right, welcome everyone to Yoga, Disability, and Transformation. Um, I'm going to read the description, and I think that the description, this conversation, if we can do it right, might be really great, but it's a difficult one. I think we have to. I'm hoping we'll be able to thread the needle to really get to the conversation I'm hoping can happen. But I do want to talk a little bit before we get going. I mean, we all pretty much, I hope, know what yoga is to some extent, right? And then what disability is. I think we kind of get, their wide range and all that stuff. But I want to take a moment for people to weigh in a little bit about what transformation is. Because we threw it in the name. It's one of those words that you kind of go, yeah, 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 An even more obscure word is transcendence, right? But let's talk about what transformation is. So I'm going to call on to give their 2 cents on what it means, and maybe even a little example of something that's transformed, not about disability, about anything. And I'm going to call on, because I haven't heard her talk in a long time. And by the way, if I call on somebody and you really don't want to talk, you can just shake your head. But Melinda Rivers, what do you think? I know she's laughing, I'm hoping, right? What do you think transformation is?
Oh, I knew you'd call me.
I
And
know.
I haven't given it much thought, but
Well, that's what I'm kind of hoping, because it's one of those words that we listen to, we kind of all agree on, and then we kind of go, huh? We all have initial impressions.
yeah. I mean, I think on some level it's well, just literally changing the form of something. Um and being able, but in order to do that, you have to be able to feel, believe, understand that there's that change is possible.
Right. And well,
Um
I think that's a big thing. So one of the classic examples of transformation is a caterpillar going into a butterfly, right? That's the one we've all kind of grown up with, where something all of a sudden goes in one end and comes out another. What I like about what you're saying, and that only helps us so much, right? But to go from something that is maybe a caterpillar, there are some pretty cool caterpillars though, but maybe caterpillars aren't as beautiful and as delicate and as lovely as a butterfly if you put all those value judgments on it. So that's what's helpful about that example. But when you say you have to believe it's possible, so you're talking more about personal transformation. So can you say a little bit more? I'm wondering if that's because obviously maybe the caterpillar does not have a belief that it's going to be a butterfly, but we'll never exactly know, right? So, right? I mean, but what I'm wondering is what you meant. You have to believe transformation is possible in order to transform. I think that's a really interesting point that I hadn't really thought about. So could you unpack that a
well,
little bit?
yeah, well, if you start with a form, whatever it is, even if you don't know what the outcome is going to be, in order for the change part of that to happen, there has to be some sort of spark that one form can become another form, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's right. And I think that part of what you're kind of hinting at, I think, is that there's an unknown element, and maybe you could even then start going, well, there has to be a leap of faith. There has to be, or the idea of that it's even possible for like you to become something different, or to have a different relationship to the body you have, right? That isn't inevitable, that it's going to be a certain way. So I like this. So thank you for actually being thrown under the bus and coming out with something that starts the thing. Now we got to go to someone else. Who else has got some thoughts about what transformation may and could be? Could be from your own life, could be, who knows what. Anybody else? I'm going to call on someone again. In fact, I'm going to call on Judy, because with all that she's seen, not just in her own body, but remember, so without giving you too much background, I like listening to Judy because she's been around and through some of the 60s, some of the 70s, wearing tie-dye. This is exactly, and then has a view of our culture. So I'm always curious about how you might view. Let's call you, and I mean this sweetly, little bit of a hippie. Like we're all a cross between our parents and hippies in a tent. You ever heard that line from Greg Brown? It's a great song. It's a great song, but we're a cross between our hip. And I kind of like you have a slightly more alternative view of stuff. So what do you think of a transformation?
Oh, I don't think I'm gonna do well at this because I pretty much just thought change,
Yeah.
progressing from one position, or not position as in yoga, but one thing to the next. Um,
Yeah.
Nothing real deep. I don't have a
Well, but
lot.
but I think that's a big thing from one thing to a next. It's kind of the same thing. Is that
Or I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say or improvement, because in my case, I'm seeing some transformation, some
Hmm.
improvement in where I was before I started, like 4 months ago or whatever it was.
Hmm.
Now I've transformed. And
Yeah. So
it's
there's
not huge, but
yeah, no, but part of it is recognizing transformation. I mean, most transformation that happens in our lives actually doesn't get to be as dramatic as from a caterpillar into a butterfly. So in some ways, transformation is in the eye of the beholder too, right? When you acknowledge that some ordinary things that change can be used as transformation. Does everyone kind of think of transformation as always to the positive, right? Like transforming has a positive thing to it, right? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Is that something we all take for granted, right? That transformation is
Mark has his hand up, Matthew.
Mark, cool. I haven't
Hey,
seen
good
you in a
morning.
while, Mark. I look forward to like catching you again. Yeah.
Cheers. Yeah, I was busy this summer, so but yeah, good
Studying
morning,
for the
everyone.
bar, right? You were studying for the bar?
No, I had my first externship, so I was down in Compton, externing with the alternate public defender.
Oh,
So it
wow.
was like 5 days a week, back in the suit and tie and prosthetic legs, and
Holy
just
cow.
shadowing attorneys and writing motions and doing law research. So it was slam packed busy, but nice to be back and good to see
Kind of
everyone again.
let's, for example, say that Mark went through a transformation back into shirt and ties
And dry cleaner bills, right? Right.
and dry cleaner bills.
Yeah.
Yes. Because
But
in wheelchair, do you get around wheelchair? Do you go on
a
crutches?
mix.
I
So
mean,
I had some days where it was just like heat rash in my legs and the prosthetic, so I'd go wheelchair bound until the rash would clear.
right.
And the wheelchair, I don't know, is so much easier on my mind because it's less arduous, it's less like intense weight bearing is what the prosthetic setup is
Mhm.
as a bilateral above knee amputee. And but yeah, it's I don't know,
Yeah,
one of those
I'm funny. I kind of hate even owning nice clothes because in a wheelchair, I always get them so dirty. I don't know if
totally
the same thing happens when you're in prosthetics, but I'm just constantly just like, why even buy nice clothes? It's not even worthwhile because
get all chewed up. Yeah.
exactly. All right, but moving on, going back to transformation. Congratulations
Yeah.
on getting through that, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hopefully, are
So
you happy you're not wearing a shirt and tie, or do you wish you could do it every day?
absolutely. No, it's like that Russian parable, the industrial worker who was miserable every day and didn't have anything to look forward to. So he'd wear a pair of boots a size too small so that when he get home at night, he'd have something to look forward to and taking off the pair of boots that were super painful. So now that I don't have to wear a suit and tie, it's like, yes! Oh,
So
t-shirt, so comfortable. Yeah,
let's
so
call that a transformation. I love that idea. That like anything that just feels better is a transformation. That's good. All right, so back
totally.
to your thoughts about transformation.
So yeah, just to echo Judy's, and like the idea of going from one place to another, I kind of liken transformation in the disability sense as kind of like transportation. And when we sustain a disabling injury, it's like our life experience kind of transports, and our mind doesn't necessarily go with it in terms of our accepting of where our life has gone. And there's the denial and that inborn resistance to believe that what happened actually happened or is taking place. And for me, like I lost my legs like 13 years ago, and I still haven't arrived at that place where I'm just like acquiesced to being fine with all these frustrations. But I had a person who looked like they were experiencing homelessness on the side of the street a year ago. I was filling up my gas or my car with gas, and she was like remarking on my prosthetic legs. And, you know, she's like, you gotta be stoked on what's now and not look into the past, you know, and this is your new norm, you know. And for me, that's kind of what transformation is working towards that goal of like being excited to be alive in the present, you know, configuration, you know, where the life is transported the body to in that sense.
That I think that's exact, and that's part of what we're all going for. So you're telling me a homeless person watching you get gas just came up and said this to you? It's one of those
Oh,
things you have to feel like maybe the universe is talking to you. You
time.
right? Sounds like a movie, right? All of a sudden
Yeah.
you're filling your gas tank, and also you get this like wisdom from coming from, you know, the loudspeaker, right?
Mm.
That's very cool. I would agree with all that. All right, so we're gonna go back to the thanks for chiming in. And the reason why I want to talk about transformation is that part of what this series is trying to be about is recognizing transformations, right? And recognize it, you know, to what extent it has changed. But so like what Mark was just talking about, that transformation of being more okay with just, you know, I'm 45 years into it, Mark, and I'm still having days that I think just kind of suck, right? I mean, right? But this idea that a transformation may not be visible, it may not, you know, and it may, but that doesn't mean it's only in your head, right? And that's a really thing that's too bad about trans, you know, if it's not visible, we think it's just psychological. No, not at all, right? Like it's more than that. And so part of the thing about transformation is that the changes are both inward and outward. And this ties into what I want to try to get into and talk about indirectly now, is that the topic today is about how it's called voice without voice. We've had something kind of similar to this before, but this one I want to try to have a little bit of a different conversation about. First, I'm going to just read you this description that I wrote. That, you know, I write these all at once, and then they change with my head, in my head over time. While there have been improvements in the extent to which people with disabilities are heard within the culture at large, we are still perceived through a lens of limiting stereotypes. We are gaining voice, but without true voice. This happens within our families, friends, jobs, political arenas, and on and on. And then hopefully we actually are gonna like identify some of the pigeonholes we get pigeoned into, and then also talk about some strategies and things we've figured out how to deal with some of these kind of limiting stereotypes. But and also like how you transform interaction with people, and that's a harder one. This is where the idea of transformation, it might be that the world keeps hearing you the same way, but you're different in the sense of what Mark was saying, right? Like that there's multiple levels of transformation here, because the culture is only going to be ready for as much as the culture can absorb, right? Your friends and family are going to be able to only, your ability to transform your relationships, as anyone knows, especially with people close in, that's a long process. That's a long game. That's not a short game. There isn't a conversation you can have and suddenly everything makes sense, right? So transformation here, I think, as a notion is really important. So have you noticed, switching now in more indirectly into the topic, have you noticed, I think this is really cool. There's a transformation in kind of the images we're seeing around commercials and even on things. Have you noticed that suddenly there's more like disabled people in commercials, kind of in the background? They're kind of like at a coffee shop. There might be a person in the wheelchair. They're all of a sudden, we're not completely absent, right? You might see some misformed bodies, you know, like you might see it. So we're kind of popping up in the background just a little bit. And so there's kind of an opportunity being happening, right? you know, like where all of a sudden, in terms of a demographic, and yet that doesn't help with invisible disabilities, right? There are all these things. The advantage to that with some of the mental health stuff is kind of some of the weird messengers are famous people talking about how they've struggled with depression or they struggle with some other things. Like you're beginning to hear Simone Biles, right? Like all of a sudden saying, I couldn't jump through this. I was having too much anxiety. And when I look at all the things she's doing with her body in this last Olympics, I can totally see, like I have trouble sometimes. Laura Hallisey and I have talked about getting the yips on transfers. Suddenly something's changed and all of a sudden you can hardly transfer. All of a sudden your strength isn't your strength anymore, or you can't stand up as well. And it's clearly mostly in your head and you've got the yips, right? With something that you just got to do it, right? There are all these things. And the part of what I didn't hear in the discussion about transformation, I don't want it to be negative, but so a lot of the people on the call are watching abilities change and physical abilities get less. I'm having that just as aging. I don't have MS, let's say, for example, but I'm watching a transformation and a narrowing of my world, right? And I don't want to just call it loss, right? I don't want to if I start telling that kind of healing story about the changes in the arc and the limits of my life, right? That's not good. We've all gone through a great big transformation in social interaction because of COVID, right? Like we're more isolated. You know, I was watching this thing by David Foster Wallace about one of the things that he was worried with before he offed himself was we're getting too good at being able to be alone. TV, media, too many screens. It's getting pleasurable to be alone, and that's ultimately not good. I mean, we need each other too, right? That's why it's so hard to be in such a divisive culture right now. And we're not trusting, you know, out in public spaces. I can tell you it's partly that I'm getting older, but I have less patience to be in large groups. You know, there are things I want to do less, and that's probably accelerated by COVID, right? But like I like this thing that actually Molly told me, Kelly Corrigan, which I don't really know her stuff, but I'm hearing she said at times I've listened to a couple of her podcasts, they're great. A real simple thing that I've been having to tell myself again, good things happen when you leave your house. Right? And that's like such a weird wisdom that as we fall into this place, or whatever, even to make a phone call you wouldn't normally make, reach out to someone that you wouldn't normally make. That's all of a sudden I'm needing to transform my outer expression and extension out, right? There are all these things that are transformations. All right. So what I wanted, so as we're becoming more visible on one level, and compared to when I was 45 years ago, I think our culture in some ways is getting more ready to hear from other perspectives, right? Quote, from the marginalized. But as soon as we have to have that label, right, we're already pigeonholed. Correct? As soon as we're on the underrepresented, which is a fact, right? We are underrepresented. We're just finally making it into commercials, right? To make somebody else money, right? We're getting into the commercials. So remember, they're trying to make money and look like they're sensitive and cool. So they're putting us in the background of commercials so they can look good. So they're taking money from our images, but whatever, right? That's good. Overall, it's good. But like, how do you so we're making the appearance, but then how do we transform that exposure? So the idea that we then need to also change the context. So what are some of the stereotypes? Like I have a couple, I want to show you a couple. So this idea of inclusion, right? Inclusive stuff. I'm jumping around a little bit, but hopefully we can get the pattern out. This idea of inclusion and that the world's opening up to us. Maybe, but I want to show you a couple of pictures, right? That are examples of certain stereotypes that are out there in a big way. The other thing that was cool that's happened is like for the first time I can ever imagine, and it wasn't 4 years ago, like the Paralympics are on television, right? Which is a breakthrough, but it also reinforces a stereotype, right? So although it's a breakthrough of exposure and whatever, it's also for those of us that's not the only path, and the only aspirational path that someone with a disability should have is to become an athlete. So, but it's one of the ones that the culture is ready for, right? The overcoming story is one of the stereotypes, and we're kind of put into that role, right away by the listeners around us, right? They're looking for that story. So Bethany, you ready to share a screen or two here?
Yep. That you
So
want
the first one is, so this is at a pretty cool avant-garde museum here in the Twin Cities. And they're putting up this picture on the wall to kind of show, look, trying to get this credit of like everyone gets to come and see things at this museum. So it's pretty obvious what's wrong with the picture, right? They want us to see the wheelchair, but she can't see any of the art, right? Like, and this is trying to be educational about anyone can come, right? So this is one of these things that makes me laugh. It's such a wild guffaw of like, oh yes, that's great. Look at the little person in a wheelchair, but they're looking at people's backs, right? There isn't actually a view. So this is one of these things that strikes me as, and this is kind of a cool avant-garde museum in the Twin Cities, which I don't want to really throw under the bus. They mean well. But while I was at this museum, their elevator between the floors also broke, and I got kind of stuck on one level, and it was closing, and they hadn't paid for the upkeep. The thing had broken many times. This whole thing, and this is the thing they're putting up on the wall, right? So again, the image speaks for itself. All right, so there's inclusion, but it's without a view, right? All right, so then the next picture is something that I think Amanda, didn't you, Amanda? I think Amanda posted this, isn't that right, Bethany?
yes.
So here's another like stereotype, and this is kind of cool. I kind of like the hat. I would even maybe wear this. Broken crayons still color, right? Which is also a lens, like, and what was this for again? Was this was just a hat, but wasn't it part of
This,
an organizational thing?
yeah, this was to encourage people to come to disabled sailing.
Sailing? So, okay, all right. So in a way, I like the hat, and I even kind of like the message a little bit, right? Like, yeah, hey man, but the idea that we're broken crayons and we can still make beautiful art, which on one level is true. This is what's so tricky about some of the stereotypes and also platitudes within our culture, right? Is that they become what they become because there's truth to them. They're just not the whole story. I'm not exactly, it took me a while to figure out that I could possibly be offended by this cap, right? I didn't get it right away, right? Like, wait, but now when we're in this context, a lot of you started nodding right away, like there's something wrong with this. But the idea is, look at what I can still do. I'm still capable, even though, right? So, Cindy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that it kind of goes back to that idea of like, does transformation always have to be positive? Like, a lot of these stereotypes are about trying to find inspiration in disability, and at the same time ends up sort of silencing the struggle and the grief, because I think like the culture just isn't ready to like really deal with that aspect of it, that
Yeah, I completely agree, right? And then, so one of the things I want this conversation to, I want you to say more about that, right? But then I want, by the end of the conversation today, I want it to transform into, is that the only story we want the culture to hear?
Mhm.
Right? Which is
Yeah.
also another, because in a way, yeah, so that, but like, so when you say, so that's a place we want to go in this conversation, but this part's really important, right? That like you're saying that there isn't the capacity to say more about being, is there space for them to really hear? They're not ready for it. Say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, well, you know, like when I think about the Paralympics and like the overcoming and, you know, like sort of I don't know. I think a lot of that, it's, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about mortality recently. Maybe that's a little deep, but it seems to me like
Oh, we're
it's
all
all,
thinking about it, right? Holy
it's
cow.
all, it's all really connected to that denial of mortality, right? And like that, like, you know, things, you don't have ultimate control over everything. And I think that people with visible disabilities really end up being sort of a symbol of that for people, and it's scary, right? And so the idea that like you can control or overcome, um and that we can kind of erase the hard part is, I think, is very comforting for folks who aren't, you know, having to deal with that like on a daily basis.
Yeah, and so that's part of what you're saying is under, you know, giving an analysis of what leads to them being, people being inspired by the overcoming story, that somehow it makes them think that even if they were altered radically, they could still get back to normal or get back to meaningful, but they're not ready for the fact that no, it still sucks. I mean, you know, right?
And the
I mean,
transformation is painful. It's hard. It's uncomfortable, you know? And so like, even though we like to think that it's progressive and it takes you somewhere better, it's, you know, maybe not, like it's making those value judgments is difficult, but it's, I think that like the difficulty, the work of transforming oneself is something that like isn't for public consumption. It's almost like, you know, we just don't talk about it, right? Like
right.
we hide that part of the work that we do all the time.
So one of the examples and why, in terms of hearing about the work, we also glorify the work. Like this happens a lot with athletes. We keep hearing their story of like, oh my God, they get up at 6 a.m. and they run 7 miles and they do this and they do that. So there's a story of the work it takes. But think about the work that it has taken you, not just you, but everyone on the call, the work it takes to not just get up and get out of the house, right? But also all the things you have to work through, the invisible fences and barricades, and to just have a normal interaction, right? When you come in, and this is more true with visible disabilities, but it's almost impossible to come into a room if you have a more overt disability to not come into that room as a disabled person, right? Like that, because no matter what I do when I come into a new room, they're seeing me through a certain lens. And that sometimes helps me and sometimes that hinders me. It depends on how I'm going to open my mouth, right? And what I'm going to try to say and how I want to be listened to. But this idea of, I think you've uncovered one of the motivations of the discomfort with what disability makes everybody feel. On the flip side, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I have the opposite experience because I have hearing loss, and it's most people don't notice it.
Yeah.
And then I have to decide how I'm gonna come into the room and how I'm going to explain that I need, you know, I need people to talk to me in certain ways so that I can hear them, you know. And so it's like it's a very different thing, right? So like, you know, there's still that anxiety going into especially a group situation or a noisy situation, but but yeah, there's that preparation that has to happen.
Yeah, see, that's and so important. Like exactly the opposite is like you're saying, for someone that doesn't have the overt thing that puts people out, like how do you want to advocate and tell people, or do you know, all those things up front, right? So Bill, your hands up.
Yes, yes, thank you. And I'll try to be really quick. An example I have in one of the largest rehab hospitals in the city where I live is on every wall it says the power to overcome. And I told the CEO that I thought they should change it to become instead of overcome, and she didn't take it too well. But that's all right.
Really?
I mean, oh God, it was, well, they're gonna have to change all their logos and all their branding, Matthew. You know how it is. It
Yeah.
hurts. It hurts. But I leave the house, Matthew, and you triggered it a little bit. When I leave the house, I tell everybody I'm in combat zone, because literally I can have my life taken away, and almost have, in a split second, by a child running in front of me when I'm in my power chair and having to stop, whatever. So and no one can understand it. And you try to explain it, so there's no voice or language. I think voice begats words, begats story, and then becomes language. And I think our job is to help everybody find a dialogue and a definition which has never been established, because, as everybody points out, this is so broad, this is so vast, it affects everyone, because from the moment you're born, you're aging. And I can tell you, as soon as you stop gaining about 18, you start losing. And no one's going to get out of that slide, but no one wants to see it. I honestly tell people, for every loss I got 10, and I don't know if it's 10,000 or whatever gifts, but I have to stay a long time in a very shitty room to find the pony, kind of to say. And I have to dig through that and be able to, because I think my job as a human being is to hold my pain long enough that I can give it away as a gift. And I think that
transform it into something that becomes something that's
a gift.
well,
A gift.
yeah.
So transformation comes on, I think, 4 or 5 levels. You have the outside environmental, you have the internal physical, but then you have the spiritual, mental, and emotional, and all those have their own level of intelligence and require their own level of transformation. And, I also said, a good idea without action is pretty much masturbation. So I just don't, it's just hard to communicate, because I know I had a young lady, I was coming from a doctor's appointment. She ran out in front of me and goes to my van that I'm illegally parked, because it's easier to get into the doctor's office. And she says, I want to help you. I said, okay, how are you going to do it? I'm going to open the door. I said, you can't help unless you can stay and listen to the person's need. And that's a painful thing, because it shows our vulnerability. But I'll leave it at that, because I got plenty more I could say, as always.
Well, there's a lot of stuff. I do want to ask a follow-up question to the thing you started off with. And to get it, because it's so easy to, first of all, I think everything you said there really works, right? I want to go to something in the beginning, as in the actual conversation, when you pointed out the power to overcome, and you wanted the power to become, right? First of all, I'm curious, because there's a real practical example of, oh, you're getting hurt, right? And I said, well, she didn't like it. And you said about branding. Yeah, it's money they don't want to respend, right?
Well, it's shame, and it's guilt for having the wrong message.
Well, but see, there's one of the stereotypes, right? Mm-hmm. That we are in the language game with all the time, is as soon as you point something out, there's an immediate move like, well, I've done something wrong. How can I fix it? How can I improve it? rather than letting it be an observation. So there's one of the stereotypes that limits what we have to say, right? First of all, the idea between overcoming and becoming, it's actually a beautiful switch, right? And it's deep. A couple of things I want to ask practically was, did she get your point, or was she too busy feeling guilty?
I can't tell. You know, I can't tell because I haven't seen action, so I don't think there's much getting.
Well, I
the
don't think they're
point.
going to change it for a wide
Or the
variety.
discussion to open perspective, because transformation doesn't come without discovery and perspective. And you know, you have to have different perspectives, so you have to open up your depth of field and your perceptions open, and that comes with community and communication.
Yeah. So, but one of the things I can tell you, one of the practical reasons, not only they have to rebrand everything, which they wouldn't do, that the real, I know this as a fundraiser, and it's been one of the problems for Mind Body Solutions, because I can tell you they would not raise nearly as much money from the power to become as opposed to the power to overcome. Right? It's one of the things when you're trying to raise money, people, for the reasons that were just pointed out about mortality and the uncomfort of the truth of our story, right? That our culture is more ready to be inspired and give money to the thing that bypasses the inevitable transformational decline of aging, for example, or of illness, right? And so it's one of those things that it wouldn't work for them as well. So they're never going to change the branding. I was also curious about if she could hear the point. You know, my body solutions gets things pointed out all the time, and sometimes you have to do the nod. Sometimes you can tell you're just giving the nod. Sometimes you take the nod and it's kind of like, oh my God, I get that point, but we can't do anything about it. And what would be great is if they owned why they can't do anything about it. And the truth is they can't raise as much money, and it, you know, if they, you know, is part of it. So there's,
and the truth is that, as you said, even the stereotypes, there's truth in it. So you
there's
have
truth,
to
yeah.
accept the reality of what's there, and that's perspective busting before you even know there's another place there. You can't even see the threshold, much less the transformation, unless you open your perspective and say, because when I was unplugged, paralyzed, and a few other things, you know, we don't have a chance on sudden catastrophes to go back to any norm. So you have
Right.
to start recreating a whole world for yourself, and that's a pretty challenging thing. When you're speaking in tongues and no one can translate you, pretty
That's
much.
part of what is interesting, is that kind of thing you're pointing out. You say speaking in tongues, and Samantha, you're coming up here in a second, is that there isn't even the language yet, or it's not even before the language. There isn't, let's call, someone was talking in my class the other day about the pause. There isn't the pause and openness in the conversation that would even allow the words to be found collectively. Right? Because I don't exactly know what to say into the space you're trying to describe, Bill, and we all live every single day. I'm not exactly sure of the perfect story. I mean, for years and years at Mind Body Solutions, my board would say, what's the elevator story? Find the elevator story. And my answer would always be, depends on who I'm on the freaking elevator with. Because there isn't one way to have this interaction. What there needs to be is the pause of respect and the pause of acknowledgement of suffering. Or it's not just suffering, because that's one of our pigeonholes, right? That's one of the ways we get stereotyped, is that whenever we're going to say, it's going to somehow be about how things aren't working for us, right? And so, but what is the quality of the openness for us to discover the story that'll work? Samantha, your hand's up.
All right. Hi, how are you?
Good.
I love these conversations. Yeah, you know, what Bill was just saying really struck me a few years ago. Well, it's probably 15 years ago now. But the MS Society in the DC area launched this new campaign, like new branding. They rebranded themselves. And I was in the car driving home when I heard it, and I had to pull over because I was so traumatized by the advertisement, which included this whole like really dramatic thing that sort of feeling sorry for people with MS, and then their tagline became MS stops people from moving forward. And I was like, holy shit.
Are you kidding me?
I
That's
am
the
not kidding you.
tagline?
I am not kidding you. It's still their motto. If you go on, so you look at it. And then they had the letters MS in orange, and they had a black slash through it. I think it's still their logo. And I was just like, what the fuck just happened? Because like, who do they think they're serving with this? This is awful. And it's the same example. They're trying to raise money by making people feel sorry for people with MS. They're trying to like pull on people's heartstrings. And it made it clear to me that people with MS were not part of that decision-making process.
Right.
So when we talk about inclusion and voice, I think what I hear on a lot of what we're saying is, hey, wait a second, like, don't run to open my door without knowing what I want. Don't, put posters up in the rehab hospital without talking to the people who are coming into the hospital and understanding how it affects you. Because all of these sort of people trying to be helpful, as you just said about your board, like they mean well, but they profoundly don't get it. And that's okay to a point, because you can't get it unless you're struggling with one of these things. But what's unexcusable is an unwillingness to bring people who do understand it into the conversation in a meaningful way and allow them to react, respond, guide. And that's whether somebody's designing furniture or hotels or advertisements for somebody. And I do think that we're starting to see changes here. But that marginalization that you're talking about runs really deep through all of these different things. And what's frustrating to me is I feel like we're not allowed to be angry about it. And I don't want anybody here to think I'm an angry person. So I'm really not. I'm really not an angry person. But it's just in this one place where we as a community get to talk is the one place that I feel like I can say, like, I'm upset about this. I feel like people are treating us badly, and we are supposed to just sit pretty and act like we're inspirations, and we're not really given.
So that's part of the stereotype we're talking about, right?
That's my point. Like,
Yeah.
if I went someplace recently, I was invited someplace, and the people said, oh, our house is, you can get all around on one level, but they had stairs up into their house.
Right.
So I'm angry because I get there and I can't get into the house. So it doesn't freaking matter if everything's on one level, So
Right.
it's sort of like that half-ass approach to it.
Yeah. And again,
yeah.
It's hard because we're in the position where it's literally a lack of awareness or knowledge. It's not malintent when they said, oh, it's all on one level and they're feeling good about one part of their house, but they're not actually thinking about getting in through the door, right? That, like there's a lapse. I remember one time I took when I was in college, I took a class on children's literature and biases in children's literature, right? And they had us go back and read some of the stories, even like Dr. Seuss and all the things. And you can't believe how racist and misogynist and all of it. And they weren't seeing it. Like growing up, I didn't get it, right? When I was a little kid. Now you look at it, you open the book and go, holy cow, it's hard because we're kind of stuck because there's this there's this like, are you just dumb? Or did you not think this through? And the answer is, it's kind of like walking through and never noticing what shoes people are wearing. You know what I mean? That they're just lapsing. Awareness is a funny thing. And how do you draw attention to their lack of knowledge or lack of follow through is really part of the space that gets us stuck, where Bill will talk about it being as speaking in tongues. The other thing that this even gets more complicated, Samantha, in my opinion, because you know that, what is it? MS doesn't allow people to move forward. What was the tagline again?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. So, and you said nobody with MS could have been on that board. Here's how it gets even more complicated. Somebody might have been on the board with MS because they're in the part of their awareness with the disease where they're either at a serious grief part or
Yes.
before. And so
Yes.
the board even picks people
Yes.
that reinforces the message they want to give, and none of that might have been conscious. I am amazed at some of the like, for example, influencers. So if you want to be an influencer as a person with a disability, I'm about to talk out of my ass here because I'm not really on social media. But one of the best ways to be an influencer, to get a following on social media, is to be an overcoming disabled person and post really wild stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the way to get followed. Now, the question is, what do you do with that? Right? Do you because, like, for example, I said this in class on Monday, I would never have initially been invited to all the Yoga Journal conferences to teach for those few years that I was doing if I hadn't written a book. And I wasn't just invited because I don't suck as a yoga teacher, right? But I was invited because I was crippled. Let's be honest. It's okay, right? So the thing and some of the media attention that Waking got was exactly because I'm disabled. I say crippled to shock everybody, right? But they're not saying that word, but they're kind of thinking, oh, isn't that a great story? Right? And so the very hook that gets us to the back of the commercial, right, is, okay, I don't regret that I was able to do that. It allowed me to start raising money for my bodysuit, and it allowed us to grow our mission. It did a whole bunch of things. It helped get adaptive yoga on the map, but it also completely limited whatever I was going to be able to say going forward. Right? When I go speak with healthcare professionals, no matter what I do, I'm a patient story. Right? I'm not like being able to talk to professionals all the way about changing how they practice. It's always a patient having an experience that then maybe has insight, right? It's not there, that happens. So on both sides, Bill's able to have that conversation with the marketer because he's disabled, but they're not in a position to do anything about what he said, right? Because it's too much for him. So we're constantly in that back and forth of what do you say? And by the way, being angry about, I need to get way more angry in my life. I think that I've spent too much time not being able to step around being angry, at certain things. And so that's, like I'm more still being that from a generation where I'm just happy to be included in the room, right? A little bit, or happen, like I'm a little bit of that ilk. I've been doing this disability things for so long. So I certainly shouldn't be the voice that tells you what to do, anybody, exactly, because I tend to acquiesce, and because I am grateful that there are curb cuts compared to where I started and all the buildings I couldn't get into and all the places I couldn't pee, right? I'm still amazed that I can do stuff, not that I expect to be able to do everything. So I'm not the right voice for a lot of this movement, right? So, all right. Does anyone else have any comments about transformation? I want to switch this a little bit again, but I want to, like, anyone else have any
Can
things?
I add something very, very quick? You
Okay.
said something earlier about having to have that pause.
Yeah.
We're in a situation where there's no pauses in anybody's set schedule. So everything that shoots me off course is an interruption instead of an opportunity. What I found with my disability, I had to slow down enough. I had to create pause. And then I realized that if I'm not creating a safe space in front of me for people to walk into, even with stupid ass questions, and if I can keep that safe space, then we start exchanging ideas and they start, whether the words are right or not, understanding better. But I need to teach people, myself included, how to keep that safe space without it being internalized. So it is this place of love that I keep, and I just keep that circle, and it protects me from what comes in, but it connects me to everything that's coming in. And I cannot talk anymore. Okay.
I mean, safe is an interesting word there, and that's one of the words that's pretty common. I also wonder if you also we might describe that as receptive space, right? As opposed to just safe, because safe already implies, and we do know. I mean, the other thing I wanted to ask, this is getting in, I don't want to get into the yoga practice yet, but we'd have to practice yoga a little bit too. Does anyone else have any, like Bill just gave an idea there about ways that they go into space and try to, he talks about, for him it's love, right? Those are good words, right? To keep it kind of open and receptive. Anyone else have any strategies about how you facilitate interactions that have a pause built into them? Right? Any like tricks of the trade of how to Karen? You need to unmute.
Okay. So I've been invited again to speak at a stroke summit, right? But every year it's the same questions about the physical transformation. But I'm coming to the point that each year I'm transforming in a deeper inner way. So I'm trying to keep it the focus on that. But it's really a struggle because the medical idea of transformation, I think, is physical, period.
I think this is one of the really intense stereotypes.
Yeah.
Right? They're looking for you can run a real marathon. You like, are you falling less? And that's medical, but it's also a story that other people, the culture, can hear. If there's physical transformation,
Exactly.
it's also a real struggle. And I get tired of this one. If it's not physical, does that just mean it's psychological? If you think about, and so there's another stereotype. I think you're pointing out that progress and healing and transformation is always physical, and that's partly because it's easier for us to talk about those types of transformations. It's, quote, more objective, it's more visible, so there's easily more common ground. Well, now I can transfer on my own. Now I can, and even those physical transformations, I remember someone, I think it was Judy, but was saying, like, after doing yoga, she started being able to reach someone, it may not have been Judy, but maybe, I can't remember, but like they could reach and grab her towels now off the towel rack.
Right.
Now that's a really important transformational story, right? And it's physical, but it's so ordinary.
Right. I don't want to discount that, but because I know people need to hear that. They're coming to hear that. And it's a lovely thing in its own way, but I don't find it as compelling anymore. So I want to be real about, there's more past, plus they always call it recovery. Well, I don't call it recovery anymore. I'm kind of done with that.
So I think first of all, everyone wants to go Karen, go, right? Because you're exactly who should be invited to speak. And you're in a territory, in a language game, that's Wittgenstein, but you're in a language game where there isn't even the language to quite talk about it, because you get pigeonholed to psychological, but you mean something more holistic than that, right? You mean a whole new definition of healing, past a healing to cure, healing as curing, right? and not to be pigeonholed back into psychological. This is a story of the struggle of mind-body solutions the whole time. Trying to say that everyone wants to hear yoga is going to help people fall less and all the stuff. There's one level of that. Or it makes you feel psychologically better. And it's like, no, there's a whole other universe that is very hard to have the context. So I'd be curious, and if you want to bounce it off our group ever about what you're going to say, right? But I think you already know what to say.
Well, it's been developing over the years. I have a real good relationship where I like had rehabilitation, and they got kind of intrigued that I'm an artist. So that, is part of it. But
Well, but I think that would be an interesting way to try to set a new context. See, part of it, Karen, is that, and this is part of stuff that I've struggled with, is how do you change the context right out of the gate?
yeah,
And there are actually storytelling devices to do that. Like if you were to start off, let's say, and even this would get heard wrong, but if you were to start your presentation with a couple pieces of art and say, this is how I felt yesterday.
oh wow,
right?
yeah,
Right? So all of a sudden you've come right out in the first chapter, in the first paragraph, and you're reclaiming a whole different level of sensibility.
oh, that's a good
Turn
point.
it on its head right away, because then you say, at that point, anything goes. I remember a poet, fiction writer, Fred Chappell, said that to me early. He goes, in the first early, you want to claim all the territory right off the bat. So he always had something in his fiction books that was right off the bat, first paragraph, a ghost appears right in the first paragraph, right? To let the reader know anything's freaking possible now.
Wow, that's a
Right?
great point.
So there are devices that you can use to switch the paradigm, get everyone to metaphorically stand on their head before they start listening.
Wow, good point.
Right. So there are a whole bunch of ideas like that, and you can do it throughout, right? So I always start off talks by asking people to take their shoes off. Right.
That's
Which I liked Mark's story about, like wearing the worker wearing his shoes too tight. When I take their shoes off, and then I'd make it a joke and say, you gotta let the dogs bark. Like, well, what the hell? Why do we wear shoes? Right. And I make a point out back to their ordinary life, right? Here's you going back in and forth. You go, what do you do at the end of a long day at work? What's the first thing most of you do? You go home and take off your shoes. Why? But you got to let the dogs bark, right? I make a joke. And then I say, because it feels like freedom.
wow.
Right. And right away, kind of like what you're saying, Mark, about it, it's something to look forward to. But I say the sensation of freedom is what we want to have more and more in our lives. Sensation needs to get redefined. Right. It doesn't just mean you need a big open space. The sensation of freedom is something that's experienced in the mind-body relationship. So I'd be off to the races, right? We'd go from shoes off, which they don't expect in a corporate setting,
Right.
claiming a whole bunch of territory. But again, this is why part of the storytelling part of this, as we talk to each other about things we're starting to be asked to do out in the community, right? We should be trading secrets, because we do somehow have to create the pause or do something unexpected without it being too trite. Right? But don't pick a piece of art that's like you in a wheelchair. Pick, where they'll find that other stereotype of like, oh, isn't that sweet? Karen's doing this, or and somehow they'll have the lens about it through a wheelchair. Right? So those are just some thoughts. All right. So one of the things anyone else have any other strategies for doing this, not for that part, but like changing the context of a conversation to somehow create more of a receptivity? I have found that if you tell a story of how hard your life is, you don't get receptivity, you get sympathy. You get guilty listening. And that, by the way, if you want to stop me from sharing anything real, if I feel there's sympathy too much in the room too fast, I know I'm lost. I get frustrated and I'll just fuck it. I'll be like, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but I'm more likely to go, forget it. I'm good, right? So Samantha, you're, oh, got a couple hands up. Terry, your hands up.
So one of the ways that I've learned is the importance that before I speak, I make a pause of silence, just like I did right now, to make sure that I feel the subtle body connection between myself and to whom I'm speaking. Because if that subtle body connection is not present, then any words I speak will be unheard or not received in a way that I intended for them to be. However, if I take that pause of silence, it reboots the energy systems between myself and the other people and allows it to be heard heart to heart.
I think that's a real good practical thing. I've also watched people use silence for power and destruction, which you're not, but they make the silence to be intimidating. The use of silence is one of the great devices of being in a room, right? What I like about silence when I'm in public speaking is that I might forget what I'm saying, and I'll just dramatically pause, and everyone will think I'm saying something smart, when I'm actually just using this silence to find my bearings. But the other thing about why don't we want that pause in the room, right? Why don't we use that more in a group setting? One of the hard things about it is it makes you vulnerable. So if you do what you're saying, Terry, you figured out how to do that, reset your nervous system and not feel too vulnerable, because in the state of realness, we're more likely to get injured if it's not received. So you have to somehow, I know you create the pause without expectation of being heard, but that's another layer of practice that you've developed where you know how to be authentic and not be hurt by it not being heard. So you've transformed your relationship between you, the speaker, and the archetype of the listener, right? Like that you're okay if you're not all the way heard, right? And then we've all done it where you share something really heartfelt with someone close to you and they absolutely hit a dead, they say the wrong thing. And they don't even know they've said the wrong thing. And you went and it shared something that really mattered. And it hit dead ears and they didn't even know they had dead ears. And that's also something that takes certain types of grounding. Samantha, your hand's up.
Yeah, this is such a good conversation. I was thinking that in your original question about, how do we manage these interactions? I think how we feel about our own story really matters a lot and how we're perceived.
Mhm.
If we are at a place in our journey where we're really hurt and feeling sorry for ourselves, and we tell our story from that place, we tend to get that back from people. We get the sympathy because that's what they sense in us that we need at that time. And maybe sometimes that is what we need.
Yeah.
Because that idea of journey is really important for every single one of us. I mean, we are coming up against all of these similar invisible fences, but your journey with disability is so different from mine. And somebody who's been newly diagnosed with MS is in a different place than I am now after 32 years. So I think, where we are matters. And I find that I am always evaluating the person that I'm talking to or the people. And I make a decision in some way that others have said about sort of reading the room, reading the energy of I am less surprised because I have been surprised so many times over the decades by all the stupid things people have said. And now I feel that I've given enough thought that I'm prepared for it. And I go into the situations, just because I'm living my life, just because I've had enough experience. And I have addressed it by being an educator. because when I'm an educator, when I see myself as like and what I share and what I tell other people is really about, I want you to see me, because I used to not want anybody to see me, and I felt very vulnerable, and the early parts of MS, I hid it all, and that's, in retrospect, probably, like, that's a different conversation, but I wouldn't do that again. But I think that I can own my story when I'm teaching it to somebody, which is different than if I'm just telling my story and then people, it's like how you tell your story, which is your thing, Matthew, like the whole story,
Mhm.
evolution for us and getting us each to think about our story is so helpful. And I think we have to be really pragmatic, because it's not enough to say, oh, the world doesn't get us, and we don't want to spend too much time feeling sorry for ourselves that we are marginalized and that people do talk about these things, and people, like, we should just say, like, okay, yeah, they don't get it. Before I had this level of problem, I didn't get it either. So that sort of
Yep.
compassion
Yep.
and sort of, okay, let's move on. Let's just like own these stories, and then like working individually and together, which is a big part of what I think you're doing here with all these great conversations, is helping us frame that and not like beat our heads against the wall, but just say, yeah, okay, the world has all of these misperceptions and sort of cruel buckets that they put us in, and we can own our story, and we have the right to be angry about it sometimes, and
Mm.
sometimes we just need to show up and do the best we can, and know that, frankly, a lot of these other people who don't get it, they're doing the best they can too, and we're just trying to find some sort of common ground here so that we can all just keep
And
moving
and
forward.
and ways that we can, we're talking about introducing the pause, using silence, talking from the settled body, all those things, but ways to transform the context in which we're in.
Right.
And part of it is through story, part of it is picking artful stories, right? Having different versions of the story, of your own story, allowing that, not, and like what I'm going to tell about disability to a story of para-Olympians or wheelchair athletes is going to be a different story than what I'm going to tell the people that are in different parts of their journey, right? But you only know that from having been through a lot of the parts of the journey. Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and so your stories are going to evolve, and there are stories where I do play up that I was a 13-year-old boy and this is what happened. And the line that has so much grief for me is the line that I've read so many times is, and they whispered to each other right over my chest.
Right.
Right? Because that's the line that anyone that has a disability knows that that's happening. People
Right.
think they know more than I do, and they're whispering with authority right over my chest. And
As if
I'm
we weren't
not,
there.
and right. And that's a lot of how the culture interacts about disability. Right? We're like metaphorically like, wait, no, wait. Right? But they have only certain things that can be heard and not heard at this point. So we got to start practicing yoga here pretty soon. I'm going to go to Laura, and then we got to practice a little bit. But how do you maintain your Kevin Kling would call this your shape. I don't want to use wholeness because that sounds too barfy, but how do you maintain fullness in a world that inevitably is going to be partially, and I don't mean this for a person wrongly, Cindy, but like tone deaf to parts of the experience that is sometimes their fault for not hearing, and sometimes it's not their fault, right? But Samantha, your story of people with MS can't move forward, that's just so tone deaf, I can't even stand it. Like that one, I'm going to be watching and listening for a while. But how do you maintain your shape in a world that doesn't allow you to have shape all the way? Sometimes you have to be pissed about it, but that's not going to serve you either, to be pissed all the time. right? So you got to figure out what your shape means. Sometimes I need to reclaim some of my shape by being angry more, right? Angry is functional. But I go back to the line from Thich Nhat Hanh, everyone has a right to be angry, but ultimately no one has a right not to transform it. Right. And you're transforming yours a little bit by being an educator. That helps. But then I've spent years talking. I remember I spent 2 years at an eating disorders clinic, and by the end of it, I realized they understood nothing I was saying for 2 years, right? And you go like, oh my God, I thought everyone was with me there, but they weren't. Oh well, they went back to their training. It's like I didn't even show up here, right? Laura, your hands up. Then we'll do a little bit of yoga.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think another way of doing it often is with humor, you know. I mean, humor is also a way to level the playing field for people, because my experience being young with disability was I could only be less than or I could be more than. I could never be on the same level with people that were not
Yeah,
disabled.
just everyone pause with that for a second. Sorry, I want to take that in. That is so freaking right. I mean, no matter what, just let me I love that. Either you're inspirational or you're something special, or you're an object of sympathy, but actually just being able to enter the room and be all the way with people. And some of your good friends can happen with sometimes. Right? Where you just get to be that. So go on from there. So I just want to pause with that. Like somehow we're always in a hierarchy.
Yeah, so I could either be an inspiration and overcoming anything, and really I was overcoming nothing. It was all a load of bullshit. I was like, okay. Or they felt sorry for me and I was doing a lesson, which was also not true in many ways. So often, like, humor would level the playing field. And I mean, I personally think if you can't find something funny in disability, then you're just not paying enough attention, because
I think that's exactly right.
a lot of life is just kind of painfully funny. You know what I mean? It's painful, but it's also funny. And like, I mean, like that picture, like that's painful, but it's also funny that nobody saw that. You know what I mean? I was like, really?
Exactly.
Okay. And yeah, sometimes that's the way to just level the,
Yeah,
because
one of the lines that I also think in trying to create that context, although it can also not work, for different reasons if you're being serious, but Kevin Kling would always say, once a group laughs together, they're a community.
yeah,
So
definitely.
he would try to get some sort of common laughter. I mean, he's funny anyway. That's kind of his
He's funny.
shtick too. But he was definitely would be strategic about the shared like laughter. When once that happens, certain barriers that are invisible go down. But it
Yeah, and
can't
it's
be
like,
as bad as telling a bad dad joke at the beginning. You know what I mean? Some
yeah,
people
and
buy
it's
that
like
too hard.
it's like what you were asking me about earlier. It's like, you know, it's like those overcoming stories really pissed me off, but they also, I found some of them funny in the sense that I was like, I just literally crawled on my hands and knees to get out of my house today. Like, please don't talk to me about climbing mountains. I just I can't even go there. Like, it's just so painful. I was like, but also like, really, really, come on now, Um, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, so I'm doing it wrong either way. So that's great.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things when you said that early in one of our trainings, that like reading, and it was waking, and you'd think I was not offended at all. She was, I didn't want to read that book because every book on disability makes me not even feel like I'm good at being disabled. The ones that are
Well, also, I
inspirational.
mean, when I was given your book, I was like 19 or something.
Yeah. No, we don't even talk
And
about my book, but it
yeah,
does. When
but
you
I was
start to
given your
read,
book when I was 19, and I was sort of leaving school, and the panic in everybody's eyes that I was sort of going out into the real world, that they wanted to give me the overcoming story about how I would overcome the real world. And I was like, I don't think it's gonna work like that, guys. I don't think it's gonna,
Yeah.
I have a feeling that's not how it's gonna work.
Well, you know, one of the things that one of our board members would say that I really liked, they said that every time you wrestle with reality, reality ends up winning,
Mm.
right? And it's like there is just the fact that the world is the way it is. So how do you keep your shape in relationship to that? So let's switch. I'm gonna do like a 20-minute practice. Again, this is one of those conversations that I think we should come back to over and over again, different versions of it, because our responses will evolve. And our insights will also revolve. One of the things, in passing, this isn't passing, but one of the lines that Kevin Kling said to me when he's trying to get change, he says, compassion has a shelf life, meaning that if we're getting into the commercial, even in the background and being included in kind of that superficial beginning way, if people are listening to us because they're compassionate about how hard our experience is, right? That compassion has a shelf life. People can't stay compassionate and open to disability ad infinitum, right? That's hard for human beings to sustain. So his line is, compassion has a shelf life. Recognition is timeless. Meaning that if you can get them to see their experience in your experience, that'll keep them on board longer. The problem, that's a double-edged sword, right? The problem with that is when they start seeing their experience in your experience, they get caught up in their own underwear again and they forget to pay attention to the other experience. So I just had this a little simple example. This happens all the time. If you guys think about your life, it happens all the time. Where have you ever noticed when you start saying, some of us are aging. Moreover, my aging is accelerating in the last like 5 years. I'm 58, right? And you start saying things like, well, I'm getting aging with a spinal cord injury they're not made to go together, right? It's really, and everyone would go because they're aging too. Oh my God, aging it's for all of us. It's just being really hard. And it's like, yeah, yes. And it's like, don't forget that the spinal cord injury or the MD or the MS or whatever it is, and what you're experiencing, it gives you a glimpse into it, but don't make it back about you again. It's like, think about all, and they'll go, and they don't know how to process that. But the fact is, they start to see, some of my friends are beginning to see when they can't shovel and not have to take Advil, let's say, right? So shovel snow or do something. They're beginning to see that, oh my gosh, what would it be like if I started losing things? Right? If I lost some of my abilities, and it's a new thought for people. They don't have the experience, and you can't blame them. But when they recognize, they actually often center themselves again too, right? So it's a double-edged sword, but there is truth to that. So one of the things that was working about waking is that although I was talking about my particular trauma, I tried to write it in a way that everyone could see their own trauma in my story, right? And that's the secret. How do you keep it so they can see themselves, and they don't just see my story as they see it as their story, but maybe on steroids, right? Or whatever. All right. So how do you keep your shape? So one of the core things about keeping your shape, and you remember, I'm thinking I've learned a lot from my yoga practice, right? That there's a midline, right? In you, and the midline as a sensation doesn't change, right? So there's an unchanging part of your experience. And by the way, I just told a lie. Of course, it does change if you look at it, if you experience it a certain way. But there's a part of your experience that is here for sure, even though everything's shaking and vibrating, even though right now I kind of have to pee, and so I can feel my body go zoo just a little bit, and there are a whole bunch of things that are shaking a little bit, and I didn't sleep well last night, so I'm a little bit fatigued, and I got this outer body story that's happening, right? There's a part here that is completely solid, that's unchanging. We tend to attribute this unchanging to divine energy. Call it whatever you want, I don't care, right? Turns out it tends to be in the midline of your body. So in order to find the midline, you can't go directly to the midline. It's kind of like trying to grab air in front of your face, right? You can't just grab your midline. You're going to have to let it come on board, right? So I talk a lot about feeling each of your sitting bones, each of your feet, and then let a different reality and sense of the nervous system come up through the midline. So one of the ways to keep your shape, paradoxically, is to center. But think of centering as an energy, and the center is quiet. Now, whether your mind can get quiet should not be the only indicator of whether you're in the center or whether you're centered. You're going to have to learn to center and still have your mind feel chaotic. Not all reality goes through your mind. One of the ways to center is to try to create structure and awareness so the mind can surrender to what it can't quite feel. So between the sitting bones, between the feet, once you start becoming aware of the space between your knees and you draw it slightly back towards your spine, towards your belly button, doesn't it make you want to lift your chest a little bit right there? Feel that, breathe into that, and then exhale. So you got a culture around you and you got friends and family that mean well, and they don't quite have the capacity to hear, right? Your identity can't be dependent on a multitude of levels on whether you're recognized. You have to claim your own empty space. So being able to be within a culture that isn't hearing, friends and family, contexts that aren't hearing, one of the ways to get there is to soften your organs of perception. So I would say this to healthcare professionals when they're in really stressful situations. I'd say at any time, you can let go of your jaw and your temples and the inside of your mouth. You should practice it sometimes with like super heavy metal music and see if you can have super grinding music and still find the place that's centered. You'll start to realize that they're in different universes. The center is part of your shape. I hope you've done enough Shavasana where you can access it anywhere. Start practicing it anywhere and everywhere. But try to practice Shavasana in shape. Try to practice Shavasana with an alert spine. So it's not quite Shavasana, right? But there's an energy that's brought into the nervous system in Shavasana. It doesn't mean your spine can't be alert. When you have your midline, if I were to just, everyone drop your chest and drop out of this nice thing we're in, right? And your spine gets heavier and all the stuff that happens all day long, you know. If I were to now from this slumped over position tell you to feel your skin in the room, feel the junction between the skin and the empty space in the room, it's going to be hard to do. Start bringing yourself back into alignment, find the midline, find the center, soften the organs of perception. Now try to allow the center to help you feel the edges of your body. Do it the places that are easier at first. Maybe it's your face in the room. I really like the spaces between the ears and the shoulders. So I can't feel the skin on my feet, but my mind can drop into my experience and quiet down. And I start to sense the hum in my feet. But that hum, I want to be connected to the sensation of the air on my skin. I want my spine to be alert. So this energy that right now you're practicing into is never not with you. In other words, it's always with you. Softening, not just quieting the mind, but softening the organs of perception. Finding your midline and overtly trying to feel your shape through your skin. So if you're here and conjure up somebody saying something insensitive in the room right now, right? Does it really touch your shape? Or does it touch your mind? Your mind doesn't create all the reality here. When things get in and get deflating, it's because your body's responding to what your mind didn't have enough shape for. Good. And then release. I want to make a distinction between boundary around the edges and having shape. They're not the same. You want boundary that goes from inside to out. You want your boundary to be an expression of fullness, not an expression of edges. That takes the midline again, right? We just went through an exercise of like the midline makes the edges, so the space is whole. Things get sticky when you hold them in your mind. Your body only holds the outside world and like things that are insensitive if your mind lets it in. And I'm not saying you can push the stuff away. The only way you're going to push anything away is to never go out of your house. And to never go out of your house is not going to be an effective strategy. And by the way, when you never go out of your house, you're going to be more sensitive to things you watch on TV anyway, or more bad interactions, right? So again, practicing shape. So the other thing I want to just talk about a little bit is, have you practiced how to let go of mental content with your breath? Right? How to like not just, it's hard to do because when you're really anxious, it's better to do before you're getting anxious, right? If it's already stuck in there and lodged in there like a big splinter, your breath's kind of happening in the wrong universe, right? But the the notion of when you inhale and it expands, here's a line that I still like when I take a big inhalation, excuse me, I've got lots of stuff on my nose today. When I take a big inhalation, right? I had a yoga teacher say, William Pronger again, say, when you inhale, your mind shrinks. And that's a description, but there's some truth to it, right? As my body expands and I feel my body more, the content in my mind gets smaller because I'm feeling my body more, right? So the expansion of my rib cage and my lungs doesn't feed my thoughts. It makes my nervous system give more input to my body. Now on the exhale, let the content of your thoughts that are stuck in there out on the out breath of air. So you just heard something. You can't believe another interaction didn't get to where you wanted it to be. Don't just breathe the bypass. Remember how wonderful breath is. Literally take the content you're holding, make it smaller, the contraction on the inhalation, fill the body, and then let the whatever's in your mind out through the out breath. Practice this. Now, there's a U2 song I really like, Running to Stand Still, right? Do you know that song, anybody? Right? Right? But movement's really gonna help if you let your movement include the contents of your mind. Right? So instead of trying to, if you got things stuck in your craw, like shit, that interaction sucked. Kind of helps. You could crank music on really, really loud, right? Or you could start using rhythm to let go of content in your head, right? So here I've got this thing back and forth. I can think of a couple things that bugged me from earlier today. Everyone's got things. Pick something that bugged you today. I'm sure something bugged you a little bit today. And if something didn't bug you just a little bit today, you're probably dead, right? So find something in your head that's bugged you today. I'm thinking about a couple of interactions. I might have been a little bit salty this morning. So I was in staff meeting. I heard some things that bugged me just a little bit, right? And now I'm going to let them be. So once I started making it an energy that I know I'm carrying, right? I start to laugh because I can't believe I'm still carrying it. But I'm going to keep it in my head and I'm going to start moving my spine, right? I'm not just back bending to break up the energy. I'm moving my spine because the dead energy that thought's being held in actually needs to be broken up. Like the clouds just need to be moved away. And I'm going to do it with my spine. So now I'm going to like go up and over the back of my chair. And I'm going to laugh like, oh my God, why am I even holding that dead energy in my head? Like, what the hell? Right? I'm gonna just like use my spine to actually change shit. Right? To transform it. Right? And then I'm gonna move around. Remember that, like, dang it, whatever, when something's hurting your feelings and it's so much you can even feel it in your body, I'm pretty sure something's frozen. Some energy you're carrying is frozen. Conjure it, move, right? Move it, right? Remember that the world is still big. Even though you're carrying dead energy in your hand, in this end part, I'm making a whole bunch of people yawn, right? Amanda, you're not the first one. You're like the fourth one. Now, I could have my feelings hurt about that. I could call Amanda, this last one, out on the carpet, but soothing Neanderthal's done some yawning, and I've noticed that Angelique's gotten dead eyes a couple times, and right, there's a whole bunch of shit going on this call, right? And I'm gonna just go, whatever, right? I'm gonna move, but now I'm gonna move and have my midline. Can't touch this, can't MC Hammer, right? Nobody actually gets to touch the most important part of your midline. Only your mind gets touched. Then your mind affects your body starts to affect your mind. Guess what? It's all a big pile of comedy. How much you carry shit. Believe me, I'm really good at carrying static energy, right? Finding a way to perseverate on energy that I don't need to. So I'm still a work in progress here. Believe me, I'm always seeing the end of the world, right? And I'm always thinking things are fucked up. Except when I lose my body, I kind of go, oh, that seems kind of stupid. Right? You could put it in the mouth of Ricky Lee Jones and like, don't let the sun catch you crying. But the sun doesn't burn off the sadness. You do. So sit centered again. Do you know there's a part of you that can't be touched? That it's stabilizing at all times? It's here. You just got to get better at feeling it, knowing how to get there. Kind of makes a lot of the other stuff seem like folly. Except I have certain moods where don't you dare tell me that. Don't you dare tell me it's folly. Hell hath no fury like unconsciousness confronted, right? I will get pissed. And sometimes I deserve to get pissed. I live in the world too, So do you. Right? You get to have reactions to stuff. But you have all the tools to move it. To let go of it. So I'm still rocking back and forth, right? In my spine, because it's like, I don't want to stop that right away. Right? I gotta remember, because my mind's gonna freeze me without my midline. Because that's what it does. Well, hopefully, you got something out of this, I could go to Click and Clack, Tap It Brothers. You've wasted a whole nother hour and 43 minutes in the presence of your peers, right? I doubt you wasted it. Transformation happens if you allow it. If you allow things to be new again. All right, everybody. Hands together. Namaste. The spirit in me bows to the spirit in you.